Hey everybody, I can't believe it's been so long since we did this. So anyway, I've been away from it for over a month. I apologize, although I think that's kind of the way the Lord was leading. Like we needed to take a break and then come back and do this again. So last time we studied Luke chapter 19, which dealt with the triumphal entry and Jesus running the money changers out of the temple, if you'll remember all that. And the last 5 chapters are very important because it is Passover week. Jesus has entered the city. He's going to die for our sins at the end of this week. We're going to discuss and rise again. So let's get into it. I think we'll just jump right into it, and we're going to. I think this first part here, Jesus is teaching in the temple, and I believe it's a Wednesday. Somebody I was reading or listening listening to said it was Wednesday. So I think it's believed that it is Wednesday of the Holy Week. So he would have entered the city on Sunday, I guess. And then this would be the middle of the week. He's been teaching in the temple, right? Okay. So chapter 20. On one of the days while he was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and scribes with the elders confronted him. And they spoke, saying to him, "Tell us by what authority you were doing these things, or who is the one who gave you this authority?" Jesus answered and said to them, "I will also ask you a question, and you tell me. Who was the baptism of John from heaven or from men?" John the Baptist. "Was the baptism of John from heaven or from men?" They reasoned among themselves, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say from men, all the people will stone us to death, for they are convinced that John was a prophet." So they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said to them, "Nor will I tell you by what authority I do these things." So these rabbis, the chief priests and scribes, and according to the rabbis, you had to have authority. If you were teaching by authority, you had to have some kind of rabbinic authorization. Like you had to have permission to do it. And he wasn't, Jesus is the Son of God. He does not need permission, right? But they wanted to confront him on that. And so they believed a teacher should only teach what was handed down to him by his teacher. So they didn't want to turn the crowds against them. They wanted to discredit Jesus, and if the crowds got mad at them, then it would be harder to do that. But they confronted him publicly, hoping they could get the crowds to turn on Jesus. Now, the crowds considered John the Baptist a prophet. So Jesus knew their hearts. He knew exactly what to bring up to question. It's common for the Jews to answer a question with their questions. So he's acting within his own culture. But, Jesus knew what would shut them up, really, by bringing up John the Baptist. And so he did that. So, these Jewish leaders, they rejected John the Baptist, but they were unwilling to speak against him because of the crowds. So, let's keep going. We're going to read, you know how hard it is for me to go through parables sometimes, but these parables in this chapter were helpful. I love these. These are more, reader friendly. I don't know. These are just parables that I can relate to. So this is the parable of the vine growers. So Jesus keeps teaching, right? They're not able to shut him down. And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and rented it out to the vine growers and went on a journey for a long time. At the harvest time, he sent a slave to the vine growers so that they would give him some of the produce of the vineyard. But the vine growers beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send another slave, and they beat him also, and treated him shamefully, and sent him away empty-handed. And he proceeded to send a third, and this one they wounded and cast out. The owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the vine growers saw him, they reasoned with one another, saying, "This is the heir. Let us kill him so that the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy the vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. When they heard it, they said, "May it never be." But Jesus looked at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone which the builders rejected, this became the chief cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, but on whomever it falls, it will scatter like dust." So basically, Jesus, he's talking about them, the religious leaders, and how they rejected the prophets. They did kill some of the prophets, including, John the Baptist was killed. And this whole parable shows how they treated the prophets over the years and what they're going to do to him. He's predicting his own death here. I guess we could just go through it a little bit. So, I read a little bit about the significance of them even sending 3 people. Was it 3 people? But I'm not going to get into that, but you could read into that more. You could go a little bit deeper than what I'm going to share with you here. But anyway, all the prophets prophesied of Jesus coming. And in this particular parable, it's obvious that the owner of the vineyard, he's planting it, but letting others come in and tend to it. So most of the crop is going to belong to the people who are working the fields. But as payment or rent, I guess, the owner would be entitled to part of that. So anyway, the leaders knew that Jesus was talking about them. And I think the people did too, because it says when they heard it, they said, "May it never be." So they're kind of like, whoa, this is really bad. But when Jesus says what's going to happen to them, when they kill Jesus, he says he will come and destroy these vine growers and will give the vineyard to others. When they heard it, they said, "May it never be." Now, the unpardonable sin, the rejection of Jesus by Israel, the punishment for that would come in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed and the destruction of Jerusalem. But, some people will believe in, several Christian churches believe in replacement theology, which basically says that because of this, the kingdom was taken away from Israel and given to others, given to the Christian church. But really I don't believe in replacement theology. I don't think that's what Jesus is explaining here. I've gone to churches that do teach replacement theology though. But our author, this guy, Dr. Frottenbaum, I think I'm saying it wrong. But anyway, he says that the kingdom was not taken away from Israel, but was taken away from that specific generation of Jews, those particular leaders. And, the judgment was on them. But Jesus became a dividing point between unbelieving and believing Jews. And, the Bible also talks about us non-Jewish believers in Jesus being grafted into the vine, into we're Jews of the heart, it calls us. So we're grafted into that God's kingdom in that way. So it's not that I won't get into it too much more. But anyway, so the next part, did I cover everything? Okay. And I think the teaching just continues on here in this next section. Starting, wait a minute here. I skipped a page. Okay, and this one I love. Okay, so The scribes and chief priests try to lay hands on him that very hour. They want to arrest him so badly. And they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. They knew that he was talking against them. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement, so they could deliver him to the rule and the authority of the governor. So they wanted to, they basically wanted to catch him. And here the Herodians and the Pharisees are joining forces. The Herodians were Jews that were followers of King Herod. The Pharisees wanted the kingdom to be returned to David, because King Herod, the king of Israel at this time, is not a descendant of David, and they felt that the king should be. So that group of people, the Pharisees, wanted the kingdom returned to David, but the Herodians didn't. They wanted to they were followers of King Herod. Okay, so they joined forces here in trying to trick Jesus. I'm thinking they sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order to catch him in some statement so they could deliver him to the rule of the governor. So I don't know. I wonder if the spies were the Herodians, because I had read that, these two groups of people are joining forces here. But, the Herodians, they were people who were okay with Roman rule as long as it was initiated through the house of Herod, where the Pharisees were opposed to Roman rule. And remember, the Romans ruled Jerusalem. They have occupation of Jerusalem at this time. So, but they had something in common. Both the Herodians and the Pharisees opposed Jesus. So that's what they had in common. And they're joining forces to try to get him here. So they wanted to provoke him into something where they could charge him with sedition against Rome, so that Rome could get him. Or they also hoped that maybe, if not, they could get the crowd to turn on Jesus. So a positive response would have angered the people, and then a negative response could get him charged with sedition. So, well, I haven't even read the question yet, but let's read it. So anyway, let me back up and let's go over that again. The scribes and the chief priests tried to lay hands on him that very hour, and they feared the people, for they understood that he spoke this parable against them. So they watched him and sent spies who pretended to be righteous in order that they might catch him in some statement, so they could deliver him to the rule and authority of the governor. These spies obviously must have pretended that they were believers in Jesus. They questioned him, saying, "Teacher," and these are the spies, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, but you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But he detected their trickery and said to them, "Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have?" And they said, "Caesar's." And he said to them, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God's the things that are God's." And they were unable to catch him in a saying in the presence of the people. And being amazed at his answer, they became silent. He knew exactly what they were doing. He knew they were spies. He knew that they were trying to trick him. And he, being God, knew how to deal with it, right? So, the denarius, it's not a Jewish shekel. It's not a Jewish coin. It's a Roman tribute coin. So people, they were so opposed to Roman rule, they hesitated to even carry Roman coins around. So, Jesus says here, show me a denarius, so that, they find one. But anyway, it has Caesar's picture on it. So this type of coin, you could pay your taxes to Rome with it, but you couldn't pay your temple tax with it. So my author here, he says that the whole point, there's a practical point to this, the whole thing that Jesus said. Now, according to Jewish law, you couldn't use this denarius to pay the temple tax. It could only be really returned to Rome for taxes anyway. So Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a brilliant answer. To pay taxes to Rome was to accept Rome's authority, and to give tribute to Caesar was to accept him as king, and to reject God as king. So when they paid taxes to Rome, it was begrudgingly. It's not because they recognized Rome's authority over them or anything like that. So I think that's just really brilliant, the way that Jesus dealt with that. He knew how to satisfy both groups. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. So the coin really, it's only good for like paying the Roman tax or other things you might have to use Roman money for, which I don't know. I don't know what it would be. So let's read. Okay, we're going to deal, in this last section, we're going to deal with two groups of Jews. We've talked a lot about the Pharisees, but we haven't talked a lot about the Sadducees. So the Sadducees, they were a group of Jews that were from a few rich families, so typically wealthy people. And they rejected the oral law of the Pharisees. Do you remember what the oral law was? Remember, the Pharisees believed and taught that, when Moses went up on the mount to get the 10 commandments, that God spoke to him orally and gave him all these other laws. And so they would add on to the Mosaic law so many laws there's no way to keep track of them all. Remember when we talked about how like the Bible says, the Mosaic law says not to boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And that had to do with idol worship, because that's something people would do in idol worship. But the Pharisees took that and said, you can't eat meat and milk on the same plate. You can't eat it at the same time. Like a lot of Jews, even today, if they're serious about that oral law, a lot of times they'll keep milk and meat in different refrigerators, perhaps. So the Sadducees, they did have high priests and regular priests, but those priests rejected the oral law. They took the Mosaic law very literally, and they were more conservative than the Pharisees. They really, stuck to those first 5 books of the Bible. We call it the Pentateuch, or the books of Moses. And those would be Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So with the Sadducees, all their doctrine came from that. Whereas the Pharisees, accepted all of the Old Testament writings. Now, the Sadducees, they would use other Old Testament writings to back up their doctrines, which came from the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But they didn't get doctrine from those books. So in some ways they were quite different, but they were both against Jesus, right? So, the biggest difference, I think, the Sadducees focused on temple traditions. They didn't believe in an afterlife. They didn't believe in an afterlife. So they believe the soul died with the body. Now, if you read through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books, the afterlife is not mentioned. And so remember, all their doctrine comes from that. Well, it is mentioned in other Old Testament writings, but not in there. So the Pharisees did believe in an afterlife, but not the Sadducees. Another thing about the Sadducees is they supported Rome. It protected their wealth to be on Rome's side, and they were wealthy. So not that a lot of the Pharisees weren't, but I'm assuming the Sadducees more so. I mean, I don't know all the history between these two groups, but the things we know about the Sadducees come from Pharisaic writings, because like the Sadducees, their written records have been destroyed. Let's see if there's any other differences I wanted to mention. Yeah, the Pharisees, they got their doctrine from all the Old Testament books. So the Sadducees, they kind of disappeared from history. The Pharisees did believe in the resurrection, which means an afterlife. The Sadducees did not. And another thing about Sadducees, they didn't believe in angels or demons. The Sadducees enjoyed like asking Pharisees tricky questions to see if they could make them look ridiculous. And oftentimes they succeeded. And that's what they're doing with Jesus here. They're trying to make him look foolish, but it doesn't work. He makes them look foolish. I think we should read it now. So that's just a little background on the Sadducees and Pharisees. Okay, so starting with verse 27. Now there came to him some of the Sadducees who say that there is no resurrection. And they question him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's, remember, they're stuck on the Mosaic Law. They're not going to get past that unless it's just to back up their belief in the Mosaic Law. And they question him, saying, Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, having a wife, and he is childless, his brother should marry the wife and raise up children to his brother. Now there were 7 brothers, and the first took a wife and died childless, and the second and the third married her, and in the same way all 7 died, leaving no children. Finally, the woman died also. My dog is shaking, if you wonder what that sound is. He's shaking his collar. He's making noise. Finally, the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, or in the afterlife, which they don't even believe in, and Jesus knows that. In the resurrection, therefore, which one's wife will she be? For all 7 had married her. They're trying to make him look ridiculous, but he's going to turn it on them. Jesus said to them, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. For they cannot even die anymore, because they are like angels and are the sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. So he's basically saying people don't get married in heaven. Our marriage is for earth. It's not for heaven. They're neither married nor given in marriage. So they don't come to heaven married. They don't get married in heaven, okay? They're like the angels, the sons of God, who also don't get married. Yeah, this makes me think back to Genesis with my argument. I can't remember the chapter, but with my argument that men are the sons of God, not angels. In this situation, my dog wants out. I would be an unfaithful dog owner if I didn't get up and let him out. So hold on. Okay, puppy, come Anyway, I don't want to go back to that, but even here, he's calling men who have died the sons of God. So, is there anything else I want to say before I keep going? Okay. And I want to go over, before we go on with this one, since he's dealing with the Sadducees trying to trick him, I want to read how Matthew's account of how this is said, okay? So Matthew 22:30, but Jesus answered and said to them, you are mistaken, not understanding the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, or the afterlife, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. They're not angels. People don't become angels when they die. You hear that constantly because of movies and other things. But people do not become angels when they die. People and angels are separate creations. But there's no reproduction or marriage or death in heaven. And he deals with death here. Like you can't even die anymore. You don't have the same type of body you do on the earth. Okay? I like this one because Matthew points out that the reason that he includes what Jesus said in dealing with the Sadducees in that they don't understand the scriptures. They don't understand the scriptures. If they did, they wouldn't have these false beliefs. And they don't even believe in afterlife anyway. They're just playing games with Jesus, right? So let's go on to verse 37. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed. So he's proving that there's an afterlife or resurrection. He's proving it through their belief, through their, isolating the Mosaic law as their only doctrine maker. So he's proving it. But that the dead are raised, even Moses showed in the passage about the burning bush, where he calls the Lord the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Now he is not the God of the dead, but of the living, for all live to him. Okay, so Jesus is using the Mosaic law where they get all their doctrine from, and he knows, being Jesus, he knows exactly what passage to go to. And he mentions the burning bush where God reveals himself or calls himself the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, all of whom were dead at the time, all who had died on earth, right? But if there's no resurrection or afterlife, why does God call himself the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob if they're no longer living? And Jesus said he's the God of the living, not the dead. So they are experiencing an afterlife. Right then, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were in heaven with an afterlife. So, or, yeah. Or I guess in that what I mentioned to you that time, in that holding place. Oh, it's slipping me. Sorry, guys. We talked about it a few lessons ago. Oh, gee. Prison. We talked about, Abraham's bosom. They're in Abraham's bosom. Okay, but let's not get into that right now. Okay, so verse 39. Some of the scribes answered and said, "Teacher, you have spoken well." That was fake. They're playing games with him. "Oh, teacher, you've spoken well." They're not being genuine, guys. For they did not have courage to question him any longer about anything. And of course, they're wanting to please the crowd, right? Then he said to them, "How is it that they say Christ is David's son?" And this is Jesus speaking. "How is it that they say Christ is David's son? For David himself says in the book of Psalms, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet.' Therefore David calls him Lord, and how is he his son?" And while all the people were listening, he said to the disciples, "Beware of the scribes, who like to walk around in long robes and love respectful greetings in marketplaces and chief seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets, who devour widows' houses and for appearance sake offer long prayers. These will receive greater condemnation." So he's really nailing the scribes there who were trying to act like they're on his side. So he's kind of calling them out publicly here. They're not genuine. They say these long prayers to impress people. They're all worried about their appearance. They devour widows' houses. There's a lot of abuse concerning money of these Jewish leaders. Even when Jesus ran the money changers out in the last chapter, people were there for the Passover. A lot of times they had to exchange currency, which the Jews did right there unfairly. I mean, they would have to pay a lot extra to get their currency exchanged. If they were traveling, they would bring in an animal, or if they brought in an animal, it was hard to travel with one, so the Jews would sell them one for far more than they should, far more than fair market value. But if they did bring their own animal, the priest would declare it unclean and say, "Oh, we'll sell you one. We'll take your animal and you pay us far more than you should." And then they would take that animal and decide it was okay and sell it to somebody else and make money. I mean, it was really bad. It wasn't just making money. It was really, well, look how Jesus describes some of the activities that they would do: devour widows' houses. I mean, it was abusive. It was abuse in that way. When Jesus quoted that passage from Exodus about the burning bush, he knew that would have meaning for both the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because the Sadducees get all of their doctrine from the books of the law. But if he had quoted from another Old Testament passage, it wouldn't have had the same meaning. He knew exactly what to do to accomplish his purpose and to shut these people down. So I just love all these different stories of when Jesus is teaching in the temple here. So next time we're going to have an example of how they abuse money, or how they abuse people to get money. And we're going to read about the widow's gift next time. So I'm excited about that. But that's the whole chapter. I hope you can get back into this with me. We have 5 chapters to go. And, we can finish it up. So it's getting more and more interesting as Jesus approaches his death and resurrection at the end of this Passover week. So have a good weekend, and I hope you join me next time.